everyone. Is it good for me to use a microphone? I'm getting over laryngitis and I was afraid if I try to project, you won't hear me. Good? Okay. Or if I talk like this, can you hear me? Not as good. Okay. Perfect, so I will use this. All right, welcome. Well, I am so excited to teach the final part of this series because this element, the element of water, is my favorite element, and it's actually been really central to my journey to the rabbinate and my whole Jewish religious journey. So I'll give you a little bit of background, and then I'll delve into an exploration of the symbolism of water in Judaism, in particular the mikvah, and the meaning and the rituals of the mikvah. But how did this come to be for me personally is that when I was an undergraduate, back in the early 90s, I went to Princeton University as a young, curious Jew. I had grown up in a secular home, but I had gotten involved in a Jewish youth group, and through that youth group, I had heard about the Alexander Muss High School in Israel program, which was actually started here in Miami.
Yes.
And I went on that program the summer of '89, and I came back transformed. I had a teacher who literally transformed my life, fell in love with Jewish text study, fell in love with Jewish history, with the land of Israel, and went off to college starting to become more observant of Jewish rituals, becoming a religion major at Princeton, which was an excellent department academically, getting very involved in the Hillel, and that really became the trajectory of my life of Jewish studies and Jewish practice, and eventually going to rabbinical school and meeting Jonathan. So as an undergraduate, I didn't know much about Judaism because I hadn't really grown up with much of a Jewish education, and I took my first Bible class, and it was called Feminist Perspectives on the Bible. It was my freshman year. I had never studied Torah seriously, never studied Bible, and this was a visiting professor from Hebrew University, Alana Pardes, who's one of the leading feminist, we call them feminist criticism, but that sounds like a negative word. Feminist criticism means a gender lens on reading text, and she had been writing a book called Counter Traditions, which was kind of a feminist read of the Bible, and got to be in her course as she was basically teaching her book, which was about to be published. And it was my first exposure to Bible, and I fell in love with the Bible through a feminist criticism of the Bible, or feminist interpretation of the Bible, and then went on from there to take lots of religion classes, lots of Jewish studies classes. But by the time I became a junior and a senior at Princeton, you have to pick a research project to write a junior paper and eventually a senior thesis. And I thought, oh, I'll pick something on gender and Judaism because I'm so interested in this. And I'm literally kind of flipping through the Bible, looking for a good topic that I could spend 2 years researching. And I come across Leviticus 15, which is the chapter in the Bible that talks about menstrual impurity. And I'm like, oh, this will be a perfect research project. I'll show how Judaism subjugates women in this patriarchal tradition through a menstrual taboo. And I'll research the blood taboo in Judaism, and it'll be so interesting, in women and bodies and patriarchy. I was all like, this young. I loved Judaism and I loved Jewish texts, but I also loved the feminist criticism of these texts. And basically, as soon as I started researching Leviticus 15 and studying the Bible closely, I realized my assumptions about the meaning of menstrual impurity were not true, were not based on the biblical text or the history, or the theology of the system of purity and impurity in the Bible. And I ended up on a 2-year intensive research project on the laws of Nidah, the ritual laws of menstrual impurity in Judaism, which involves mikvah in large part. And through that, fell in love with Talmud study and through that decided to go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I majored in Talmud and eventually became, a rabbi and a teacher of Torah at the Shalom Hartman Institute. But it all started in some way with this study about mikvah. And I want to start first with a little bit about water. And as we look at a little bit about water in Torah and in text, we'll move our way into the impurity system in Leviticus, and from there to the ritual of purification, which is immersion in the mikvah, and what this all means and how we could put this together as a theological system in Judaism. Because Jewish rituals are also making theological statements. And what is the theology behind this? So I want to start by acknowledging that water is kind of core to our Jewish story from the very, very beginning. Genesis 1. Genesis 1:1. Right? If you look with me on the top of your page, Genesis 1 begins, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. V'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. Vayomer Elohim yehi or, vayehi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So what is God's first act of creation? What's the first thing that is created? Light. Right? The preamble is at the beginning of the creation of heaven and earth, when the earth was unformed and void, and there was darkness over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters, God said, let there be light, and there was light. So everything before that is kind of the preamble. And what's interesting is, God says, let there be light, and there was light. Is light the first thing to exist? Looks like water, depth, and darkness exist, right? Because it says at the beginning of the formation of heaven and earth, when the earth was this dark, deep, watery void, God said, let there be light, and there was light. So there's a whole philosophical debate we will not address today, which is the question of whether God created ex nihilo. Did God create out of nothing? Or did God create out of existing primordial material that God shapes and forms? And this was an important philosophical debate to the medieval philosophers, because it had to do with their understanding of the power of God and but from the biblical perspective, which is maybe 1,000 years before that medieval perspective, it's not an issue. It's not that God has to create from nothing in order for God to be all-powerful. Maybe not. Maybe there was this primordial void that was deep, dark, and filled with water, out of the midst of which God creates light. What does it sound like, a deep, dark, watery place out of which creation comes forth? Does this sound like anything to you? A little bit like an ocean. Right? What is dark, filled with water, life comes out of it? A womb. I would like to argue, and I don't believe this is a modern feminist spin on the Bible. I would like to argue that the image of Genesis 1:1 is the image of a primordial womb. A womb out of which creation is formed. There's depth, there's darkness, there's water. The Spirit of God hovering over that primordial womb, and then God says, let light come forth, and then there is light. Why do I say that I think this is an original biblical image? and not just a modern, beautiful feminist, like, oh, isn't it nice we can find female imagery for God? It's actually here in the Bible itself. Look at Deuteronomy 32. This is Moses talking to the Jewish people and saying, you neglected the rock that begot you. You forgot the God who brought you forth. Mecholelecha. Rashi says, Mecholelecha means Motziacha mirechem, the God who brought you out of the womb. God here is described by Moses as a rock that gave birth to you, that brought you out of the womb. In Isaiah, the mother imagery is even stronger, I think. Isaiah 49, Zion says, Vatomer Tzion, Azavani Adonai va'Adoni shechechani. The Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me. This is Isaiah speaking in the voice of the Israelites in exile that feel that God has abandoned them. And the prophet comforts them by saying, Hatishkach isha ula mirachem ben bitna. Can a woman forget her baby and show no mercy for the child of her womb? Who's her? God. Don't worry, Israel. You are in exile and you feel forsaken. Can a mother forsake her baby, the fruit of her womb? God is the mother who brought you out of her womb. How could she forget you? That's the image of God as birthing mother. And then we see, in addition to Genesis 1, where God, I think, very clearly is creating out of a primordial womb, depth, darkness, and water. And God, who is described in Deuteronomy, in Isaiah, as a God who brings you from the womb, or the mother who has brought you out of her womb, we have Passover.
You skipped the beginning to coming out of Egypt, and that's a lot.
Yeah, that's where I'm going right now.
Thousands of years.
No, what I'm going to now, I'm looking at imagery of God as birthing mother throughout Tanakh. And you're right. I guess I'm going a little out of chronology, but we always say ein mukdam ve'ein mu'achar b'Torah. There's no chronology in Torah, right? Wherever you find things in Torah, whether it's Genesis or the book of Esther or Deuteronomy or Isaiah, it's all part of our Hebrew scripture. We could debate academically the dates of which books are dated at which times, but right now I'm just trying to do a survey of this symbol of water and womb, and you're right to go to Exodus. That was my punchline. I wanted to save it for the end because to me it's the biggest proof. Think about the Passover story. The Passover story is all about water, right? First of all, water and birthing mothers. Yes, please.
And Miriam as well.
Yeah, we're
That's
gonna
important.
get to Miriam's well. Yeah,
I
think of-
didn't
Are
want
you
you to
talking
forget
about-
it.
I won't
Are
forget
you
that.
talking about Moses floating down the river?
All of it. Let's talk about all the water imagery we can think of for Pesach. I'm sorry for those online. I'm gonna have to put down the microphone for a second. I hope you can still hear me. Let's talk about water in the Passover story. So, start the Passover story with the midwives. Pharaoh saying to the midwives, all the baby boys, right, you shall kill. Well, you're right, though. First we have Moses and the Nile put in the basket, and the word Moshe means drawn out of water, to draw forth from water, Moshe. We have the midwives and their role, and the Hebrew women who are giving birth. What else? What's the other birthing imagery you can think of in the Passover story?
There wasn't any rain. I don't remember rain.
Not rain. So we have Moses, the Nile. Okay, now let's think about the Red Sea. So we have Moses drawn forth from the water, right? And Pharaoh's daughter who draws him out of the water and becomes the adopted mother. There's a lot of maternal imagery. We have Shiphrah and Puah, the heroines of the story who are midwives. We have the story of the Israelites who are giving birth. Lots of midrashim about the women in the time of the Exodus who continued to seduce their husbands. and to engage in marital intimacy and to continue having children despite the hardships of slavery. So lots of fertility in this Passover story. And then the kicker is the Sea of Reeds. If you think about the imagery of the Sea of Reeds, what is the nation? The story of Passover is the story of the nation of Israel going from slavery and being born as a free nation, setting off to create, their sovereign state eventually in the land of Israel. And they do that through this narrow channel. Look at Exodus 14. They get to the Sea of Reeds. The Egyptians are chasing after them. Pharaoh's changed his mind. He's trying to catch them and bring them back to slavery. And then, Moses holds out his staff. The waters are apart. In the bottom of page 1, the waters were split. And the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. So you can kind of picture the birth canal of the Sea of Reeds, where the Israelites go through this canal. On the other side, they're born a free nation. So there's, I think the Sea of Reeds is our birth canal. And again, I don't think this is some modern feminist read that we find water imagery and birthing imagery in the Passover story. It's the story. It's actually the kind of clear reading of the story of who are the heroines. What is the imagery that the Bible itself puts forth? And what I want to show you on page 2 is that linguistically, not just in the Bible verses and in the biblical story, but also in the way we perceive God and think about God going forward, there is a connection between womb, which in Hebrew is rechem. I'm going to write this out for you. Rechem is womb. That's Resh, Chet, Mem, right? Rechem, and we know in Hebrew that Hebrew is a 3-letter root system. So if Rechem is womb, what's the word for mercy? Rachamim. Why would there be a connection between womb and mercy? What do you think is the connection? Motherhood, say more. What's merciful about a womb? Or what's the childbirth in women? What's merciful about that? Love? Love, warmth, nurturing, right? Life-giving. So what is the womb? The womb is a safe, loving, nurturing, warm, protective space of being held, of being cared for, right? That's connected to mercy. A mother is merciful on her children. That's what Isaiah said when Israelites felt so sad and abandoned by God. Isaiah said, but God is your nursing mother. God brought you forth from her womb. How could she forsake you? So there's something about mercy, the womb. We always say, Ha-Rachaman, Hu-Yivarech et, Ha-Rachaman means the merciful one. That's God. God, the merciful one. God, the womb. And that's what we're going to talk about very soon when we talk about the mikvah. So I think I've made my opening case because I want to get into mikvah, but any comments or thoughts about this opening case that water has been an important symbol in Judaism since Genesis 1:1. It's connected to life, to creation, to divine mercy and salvation, and to our birthing story as a Jewish people. Yes.
Yes. Excuse me. Is this a general theory of all the rabbinical, or is it this one just your theory?
I guess it's my theory that I'm reading in the text, but as I'm making the case, I'm making the argument that it's not my Lauren Berkun modern newfangled feminist read. I think I'm just reading, but no, this is what I've come to after 20 plus 25 years, starting from when I was an undergraduate until now, thinking about this imagery and what I see in our biblical texts, in our Passover story.
So this theory is not what you might call the gospel, for want of a better word.
I mean, I think it's pretty accepted. It's not just me, because I'm going to bring some midrashim here from the rabbinic period that talk about this.
Anywhere else. That's why I thought I might have heard something like this before, but I've heard about.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not more widely taught, but I think that I don't want to claim that it's novel to me, because to me, I'm just reading what's in the text.
Good.
It's connecting the dots.
It's connecting the dots. Yeah. I believe it is connecting the dots, and I think we'll keep reading and we'll decide whether. I think it's everywhere. I don't know how people don't learn this, but I've been teaching this for 20 years. I teach this at Camp Vermont to my students. I've taught this everywhere I can teach this. I'm teaching this.
The more general theory, though, is the water, fine, but you've got the fish who evolve. the fish evolve into humans.
Interesting.
I
I thought we evolved from monkeys, but it's an interesting thought. All right.
That's what he meant.
Yes.
I have, when Hashem formed the wall, okay, and did they ever refer to it as the straight and narrow path?
Not to my knowledge. The straight and narrow path, meaning like ethical, moral behavior.
Doing the right thing, walking
Not
straight,
the
not
Sea of Reeds.
deviating, staying the straight path, and that's what
Not
Hashem did.
not here, not in the Exodus story, but it does exist elsewhere, like in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says that you shouldn't deviate to the right or to the left of this word, of this law. But I don't think that's the imagery in the birth canal of the Sea of Reeds. It's not brought up.
It's my theory.
That the birth canal represents like the path of righteousness.
You stay in that
I love
path.
it. It's beautiful. I think it's very beautiful.
Very nice. You keep referring to God as she.
Yes, we all have that.
And
Well, God is referred to in female imagery in these verses, and in male imagery in most verses. God is warrior, God is father, God is judge, God is king. But all of these things are metaphors for a God that is not a body. This is what distinguishes Judaism from Christianity. God does not have a body. God does not have a gender, right? God is radically other, which is why the Genesis story starts at the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth, when there was this primordial womb and God said, "Let there be light." That is a polemic against the ancient Near Eastern creation myths that existed at the same time that this Bible came into the world. If you read the Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, it starts with the births of the gods. Most mythologies that you know of, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and more ancient Near Eastern mythology, all start with how the gods were formed. And this god was the sea god, and this god was torn away from this god, and then the gods were battling against each other, and out of the blood of this god, humans were formed, and out of the, right? What distinguishes the Torah comes into the world in a historical context. So it is meant to educate the Jewish people towards monotheism, towards a non-pagan revolutionary religion that says God is not part of nature, God was not born, God doesn't have other gods that it's battling with and having sex with and, parenting other gods with. That's paganism. Judaism comes into the world. We'll begin Judaism and then Christianity and then Islam, the monotheistic faiths that say God is transcendent. God is outside and other. So because of that, something that one of you asked, because of that, God doesn't have a form. God is not male or female, but we can only talk about God through human language because we're humans. So we talk about God metaphorically. So to say that God is mother is a metaphor. To say that God is king is a metaphor. To say that God is, a warrior, a metaphor. It's important to me that we use multiple metaphors for God, including female metaphors for God that exist already in the time of the Bible.
so
is God to me is how much I let him be in my life.
That's very beautiful. God is how much I let him be in my life. That is one beautiful way to think about God's presence in the world. That God is radically other. God is not human. Because God is radically other, it's very easy to live a life where we are not aware of God, or we don't have a relationship with God, because God is transcendent. So how do we
Very
feel
personal.
God as immanent? How do we feel God as present in our lives? We do that through ritual, through prayer, through Torah study, through mindfulness and meditation, through
So,
community and mitzvot.
Rabbi Lauren, when I come in to Shul Shabbat and I say, Ma Tovu, I am so happy to be in your saints. And that makes me so happy.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Adele. That's beautiful. Okay. I'm sorry, we're going to move on now to page 2. And I want to, now that we've established that water was possibly existing before God begins creating the world, there's a primordial, mucky, watery, dark mass out of which God creates light, and then God will create the heavens, the earth, the animals, all of the Genesis creation story. What is it about water? So does someone want to read here? Mircea Eliade was a very famous professor at University of Chicago, a sociologist of religion, and he writes about religious symbols. Water, of course, is a central symbol in almost all religions, a very powerful religious symbol. Does someone want to read his understanding of why water is such a powerful religious symbol? Please.
Breaking up all forms, doing away with the past. Water possesses the power of purifying, of regenerating, of giving new birth. Water purifies and regenerates because it nullifies the past and restores, even if only for a moment, the integrity of the dawn of things.
Okay, so Mircea Eliade is very poetic, but how do you understand what he's saying about the power of water as a symbol?
Well, the oxygen in the water.
Water purifies and regenerates.
Yeah.
So water purifies and regenerates.
The oxygen keeps you alive.
It's life-giving.
Hydrogen puts you to sleep.
It's the most important commodity in the world.
Yeah.
Right? We can't survive without water. In fact, why do we read Torah on Monday, Thursday, and Saturday? Why not just on Shabbat and holidays?
To get more bar mitzvahs.
So according to the Talmud, we read Torah on Monday and Thursday as well as Shabbat, because no human can survive without water for more than 3 days. You can survive without food for probably a month, 2 months. People go on hunger strikes and they don't die. But if you don't drink water for more than 3 days, you can die. And the idea is that Torah is the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. Torah is our sustenance, our nurturance. We can't survive for more than 3 days without Torah. Just like you can't survive for more than 3 days without water. That's the reason we read Torah. Isn't that beautiful? Monday and Thursday. We thirst for God's word. We thirst for that connection to God, for feeling God as part of our lives, which we get primarily through studying Torah. Because God's not a person, God doesn't have a body, we can't see God, but we connect to God through the words of Torah. So there's also something about water dissolving and enabling you to kind of be reborn. Think about, what are some of the rituals you know about water that have that power of like rebirth? You go into water and you emerge from the water like refreshed, like you said, or renewed, or
It floats.
a new birth. What rituals do you know of?
Every day we wash our hands, we say.
Okay, so Judaism, of course. Judaism has it through the mikvah, through hand washing, Netilat Yadayim. Any other religions that you know?
Christianity.
Okay, so what is it in Christianity?
It's all about baptism.
The baptism. By the way, they got the baptism from mikvah.
Oh, wow.
Same idea. Baptism is about I'm going to be reborn in Christ.
Same.
And we do that through water. Any other religions use water?
I don't know what the Bible is.
Islam,
Okay,
wash your feet.
Yeah,
and
good.
pray.
beautiful. All right, Islam, there's also something in Hinduism with, what's that famous river, the Ganges River?
Yeah.
We go into the Ganges River and I
Ganges, yeah.
Okay, so lots of religions have this instinct that water is a powerful symbol for purification, for rebirth. What I want to now do is talk about the Jewish ritual of mikvah, which is our water ritual. Yes?
I just wanted to say that most living organisms are mostly water,
Yes.
like 90%
Yeah, even,
water.
yeah, right,
And-
it's true.
But I just wonder how much of all of this isn't maybe the other way around, that people realized the properties of water and gave them a symbolic meaning for
Yeah,
their existence. In other words,
sure.
over the years, people found that washing their hands prevented disease.
Yeah.
And
For sure. You could do this with all of our rituals, same with kashrut, same with religion in general. So humans construct religion as a human construct because it helps bring meaning to our lived experience. For me, that's always a possibility. And that's what I have loved about studying Judaism from an academic perspective and a historical, scholarly perspective, in addition to studying Judaism from a spiritual perspective as a religious person. And to me, either way works. Whether God has given us this Torah and has said to us, water is your purification ritual, or whether humans, through our own creativity and our own intuitions, decided that water should be our purification ritual because actually washing our hands keeps us from getting sick, and immersing in water reminds me of a baby in the womb. It still brings meaning to human life and helps us connect to that which is beyond ourselves. So I don't know if that's the kind of question you were asking, but I think it can work from both directions, whether it's God-given or human intuited or human created. But that's a much bigger question about religion in general and the human role in the religious system. I tend to take a very humanist perspective on religion. I think this is a system that humans created. I think the Bible was written by humans. That's my personal approach. But it doesn't make the system less holy to me. And we can talk more about that when we get to mikveh.
Oh, I got it.
Rabbi, when we got married in Europe, the first Rabbi, did I go to the mikvah? And it wasn't so easy to find, but she wasn't married unless I went to the
Right, so we're going to talk about, so if everyone heard what Ms. Adele said, is that the first question that was asked of her was, did you go to the mikvah before the rabbi would agree to marry her? Because it's a traditional obligation for a bride to immerse in the mikvah before her wedding. And we'll talk about that for sure. And what's amazing about mikvah as a ritual is how enduring and important this ritual has been for thousands of years, when Jews were living in very difficult circumstances where the only mikvah was like an icy well in the middle of Russia, that people would have to in the secret of night so they're not caught by the Gestapo, I'm mixing lots of historical things. But the point is, people would find ways to immerse in living waters to fulfill this mitzvah because it was so important. And the Talmud says, when you get to a new community, there's certain institutions that are essential and required that you build to have a Jewish community. A cemetery, but the first one's a mikvah. A mikvah, a cemetery. Before you build a synagogue, before you even build a school, the mikvah and the cemetery. Okay, let me talk for about 28 minutes, and then we're going to open it up because I will never get through this material. I promise you. Go ahead. One last question, then I'm going to talk.
I think you realize very quickly that to stop thinking they have to immerse in the water.
Who?
Human realize quickly that they stop stinking, smelling.
Yeah.
As soon as they.
Okay, but what you just said is really important. So, So we've had several people argue that maybe we came up with the ritual of mikvah because they were dirty. So here, I'm going to present for about 15-20 minutes everything I want you to know about mikvah, and then we're going to open it up for discussion for the rest of the time. So stick with me.
Was this mostly for women or both?
Both.
Both.
Mikvah is for both, equally for men and women in the ancient world, and I'll explain why it's primarily been for women after the destruction of the temple.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
Before water, Rabbi Guido Cohen mentioned that water wasn't healthy in those biblical days, so they drank wine.
Yeah.
So did wine have anything to do before the water?
No, because what we're going to learn in a minute
Substitute.
is that immersion in water has nothing. That's okay. Immersion in water for this symbolic system has nothing to do with hygiene. It's not a bath.
Purified.
It doesn't even have to be clean water. It doesn't even have to be water that's healthy to drink. And now let me just talk for a few minutes to lay it all out, and then we'll ask questions. So let me start with last Shabbat in the Haftorah. Last Shabbat in the Haftorah, in the book of Jeremiah, we read the following. Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach Adonai V'Haya Adonai Miftacho. Blessed is the one who trusts in God, whose trust in God alone. And then it goes on. If you trust in God and only in God, what will you be like? It says, that person shall be like a tree planted by waters. O throne of glory, exalted one of old, our sacred shrine. Mikveh Yisrael Adonai. Mikveh Yisrael Adonai. The mikveh of Israel is God. Now mikveh means mikveh, but mikveh also comes from the root tikvah. Right? The hope of God, the hope of Israel is God. So there's a little play on words here about water. If you trust in God, you're like a verdant tree planted by water. And the mikvah of Israel is God. And then it goes on to say, all who forsake God will be put to shame, for they have forsaken the Lord, Mekor Mayim Chayim, the font of living waters. So God in this section, which was just last week's Haftorah, is called a mikveh, is called the font of Mayim Chayim, living waters. And now we're going to say, okay, what is this mikveh? What is this living waters business, and how does it work in the system of purity and mikveh? One last text before we get into Leviticus, which was when I was only 16, the beginning point of this academic journey that I took into this topic. I'll share one final thing with you. In the Mishnah, because you asked, is this just Lauren Berkun's take on God and water symmetry? I really don't believe so, because we have ancient texts that talk about this. So look at the Mishnah, which is from the year 200, that's talking about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the day we wear white, the day we understand that we can stand before God pure from our sins. It says, Rabbi Akiva said, happy are you, Israel, before whom do you make yourselves pure? And who makes you pure? Your Father in heaven. It should say your mother in heaven, if we were going to really be consistent with our metaphors, but that's fine. Your Father in heaven, for it is written, I shall sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean, or pure, tahor. And it's also written, Mikveh Yisrael Adonai. The mikveh of Israel is God. Just as the mikveh makes pure those who are impure, so the Holy One makes Israel pure. Meaning that, this is going to blow your minds, guys, but Yom Kippur as a day is like immersing in the mikveh. The day itself is like one giant mikveh. You enter Yom Kippur impure because of all of our sins that we carry into the day. We immerse in this day where God will purify us from our sins, just like the mikveh purifies those who are impure. So it's a beautiful image of rebirth on Yom Kippur, that we get a clean slate, a new chapter in our book of life, a new page in our life. But let's go way back to the beginning. When I was flipping through the Bible as a teenager looking for a research undergraduate project, and I came to Leviticus 15, and I read the verse about menstrual impurity completely out of context, I was like, oh, look, the patriarchal religion that finds a menstrual taboo, like lots of other ancient religions, by the way, had a menstrual taboo. That they believed women in their menstruation were demonic or impure, needed to sleep in separate huts and all this. So I thought, okay, Judaism, like those other patriarchal religions, has this feature, and I'm going to study it and trace it. But immediately as I started to study it, I realized, first of all, that chapter 15 of Leviticus doesn't just deal with menstrual blood. It deals with all genital discharge, not semen, not urine, but male abnormal flows like pus coming from the penis, semen, menstrual blood, and some sort of discharge outside of menstruation. Okay, it sounds gross, and why is the rabbi standing in front of you talking about genital fluids? Because it's in the Bible, in Leviticus 15, and you can see on your page, on the top of the page, the ABBA structure, which we call a chiastic structure. I'm going to be all fancy and talk to you about biblical law. A chiastic structure is ancient legal codes that are organized in an ABBA format to show you that the A cases are the abnormal cases, and the B cases are normal, right? So semen and menstrual blood are normal cases because they are natural bodily fluids. And not just natural bodily fluids, but bodily fluids that do not have any moral connotation. It's not immoral to have a discharge of semen. In fact, it's a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. And yet, anytime a man emits semen, he becomes ritually impure. Anytime a woman has menstruation, she becomes ritually impure. Now, the outside cases in Leviticus 15 were abnormal, like some sort of, maybe for the man, some sort of a disease like gonorrhea, or for a woman, maybe hemorrhaging or something abnormal. And in those cases, you're impure for a much longer period of time. So for example, in Leviticus 15, a man that has an abnormal flow, which was called a zav, which just means a flow, he had to wait 7 days and then immerse in mayim chayim, in living waters, before he could be pure. Semen, he just has to wait 1 day and then immerse in mayim chayim before he can be pure. Same with menstruation. Menstruation, according to the Bible, is as long as you're menstruating, and they give it a total of 7 days, then you immerse in mayim chayim and you're pure. If you're having a discharge outside the time of your period, you have to add an additional 7 days. So we don't have to get into the details of all of this, but you should know, in this time period, in the period of the Temple of Jerusalem, these categories of impurity, again, had nothing to do with your moral status. You're not immoral because you've contracted impurity. And you're still able to go around and function in your everyday life. You don't have to move out of your house because you're impure. You don't have to, this whole Sarah's tent thing, the book written by Anita Diamond, which is a wonderful story.
Red tent.
The red tent.
You said Sarah's tent.
It's not historically accurate. We know from the ancient literature that Jewish women in menstruation didn't leave their homes and live in a separate tent because everyone was in a state of ritual impurity. Men that had semen, women that had menstruation, anyone who came into contact with a dead body was in a state of ritual impurity. Anyone after giving birth to a child was in a state of ritual impurity for different periods of time, if you had a girl, if you had a boy. And if you had a white, scaly skin disease, usually we assume it was leprosy, again, you're in a state of ritual impurity. The only ramification for ritual impurity is that you can't go to the temple and offer a sacrifice. You could still go to the nursery school and teach kindergarten. You could still, sit around the table and have a meal with your family. But you can't go to the Temple of Jerusalem and offer a sacrifice, because this was a ritual status. And the most severe form of ritual impurity at the time of the Bible was tumat hamet. Tuma is the word for impurity. It's unfortunately translated as uncleanliness, but you know what's not on this list? You could roll around in horse manure and you're not ritually impure. You could fall into a puddle of mud and you're not ritually impure. What's also super dirty and gross? Whatever. You could have snot, you could have blood gashing out of your arm. No, not ritually impure. This is a symbolic system. And because it's a symbolic system, it's not about actual filthiness or dirtiness. It's about things that symbolize death. Because the number one form of impurity was coming into contact with a corpse. And the other things on this short list, it's not a long list, it's a short list because it's a symbolic system. The other things on the short list are things that either make you look like a corpse, that white scaly skin disease made you look like a corpse. You could have a disgusting flu where you're like coughing up mucus and snotting everywhere. You're not ritually impure. But if you had this white scaly skin disease, you looked like you were a corpse. Numbers 12, when Miriam gets leprosy, Aaron says about her, she looks like a mate, like one who is dead. That disease did make you ritually impure. And things flowing out of your genitals, not urine, but semen and menstrual blood, which were connected to what helps you generate life. And it was understood in the ancient world that when semen comes out of your body, that semen or menstrual blood, because in the ancient world they thought menstrual blood was female seed and semen was male seed. So these were the seeds of life that were lost potential life because it's flowing out of your body. And so it's a symbol of death or the loss of potential life. And because of that, it's some sort of a confrontation with mortality. And what happens when we confront mortality? Either because we see a dead body, or we have a disease that makes us look like a corpse, or things are flowing out of our genitals that could produce life, but in this case did not produce life. In all of those cases, according to this symbolic system, we are in a spiritual state of being distanced from life. And because God is the God of life, we cannot go to the temple to encounter the God of life, to draw close to the God of life, if we have somehow been harmed by our confrontation with death, or we're in a state of impurity where we've contracted or contacted death, and we haven't yet had time to process or go through a healing process. And what is the healing process? I've confronted death. I saw the corpse of my loved one. By the way, that was a mitzvah. That was a really good thing that I helped bury my parent, or I helped bury my sibling. That was one of the greatest mitzvahs. And yet I contracted ritual impurity in the process of performing that mitzvah. Again, remember, I'm not immoral because I'm impure. I'm just ritually in a status where I can't yet come forward and stand before the God of life because I'm still touched by death. So how will I heal from that and go from the status of impure to the status of pure so that I can once again go to the Temple of Jerusalem and stand before the God of life? I have a great ritual process to do that. I'll go back to the womb and I'll rebirth myself. I'll immerse in water, which is like going back to the womb, those waters of refreshment, like you said, of rejuvenation, of rebirth. And when I emerge from the waters of Mayim Chayim, of living water, of mikvah, I'll be able to come back to life. And now I can go back to the temple. That's the ritual system. And it works just as much for women as for men. There wasn't a gender stigma here. There was just as many in the biblical time, just as many men that were in this stage of impurity as women. And the purification is the same. Immersed in water. That's why when you go to Israel and you go to the Kotel and you turn the corner to the southern wall excavation, there's like, I'm going to make this up, like 300 little mikvaot that they've discovered. Because everyone that came on pilgrimage to the temple, before they could go up the stairs to enter the Temple Mount, they all had to immerse in a mikvah. Men and women, everyone. Because all of them had come into contact with a source of impurity at some point. Either through semen or menstruation or through a corpse, right? So that's the context. Yes?
Did the men and the women share the mikvah? Like women first, then the men? Or
Probably there were different separate mikvaot. There was a women's mikvah and there was a men's mikvah. And to this day, there are women's mikvaot and there are mikvahs that men go to. Yeah. And sometimes it's the same mikvah and there's just hours for women at nighttime and hours for men in the day. But often, like in the Hasidic community where men go every Friday before Shabbat, there's a men's mikvah and that's separate from the women's mikvah.
Well, it has to be running water. Right?
So we're going to talk about how you build a mikvah in a second, but I want to make sure we all understand the symbolism of mikvah.
Coming from the cemetery, you have to stand and always wash.
So when you come from the cemetery, that's a symbolic holdover from the time of the temple, where we are symbolically purifying ourselves. But guess what? Every single person in this room, every single person on this planet, according to the biblical system of impurity, is in a state of ritual impurity because we no longer have a temple. And the steps of purification, according to the Torah, involve immersing in Mayim Chayim, going to a mikvah, and then bringing your sacrifice. So that the way that we purified from coming into contact with a dead corpse is we separated for 7 days, we immersed in the mikvah, we brought the sacrifice that involved the ashes of the red heifer, remember that whole, and we don't have that ability anymore because the temple's destroyed. So everyone's in a state, technically, of ritual impurity, which is fine, because the only ramification of being impure is that you can't go to the temple, and there is no temple, so no problem, right? There's no temple of Jerusalem for us to desecrate, so we all perpetually stay in a state of ritual impurity until the Messiah comes. So you might ask, why are women still going to the mikvah? Or why are Hasidic men still going before Shabbat or before Yom Kippur? And I would say there's different answers to those questions. For women, the reason women are still going to the mikvah is because of this system called, if you turn the page to the bottom of the last page, Taharat HaMishpacha. You see that term on the second to last section where it says traditional uses of mikvah? Taharat HaMishpacha means purity of the family. This is symbolic purity because we don't have a temple. So all of us are technically in a state of ritual impurity, but the purity of the family relates to a different set of laws in the Bible, Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, that say a man should not sleep with his mother, a man should not sleep with his daughter, a man should not sleep, all of the sexual incest laws. A man shouldn't sleep with an animal, bestiality laws. A man should not sleep with a menstruating woman. Okay, doesn't say why. It says at the end of Leviticus 18 we shouldn't follow the same practices as the pagan people amongst whom we live. But because there was a prohibition against having sex with a woman while she's menstruating, there was a whole system of laws that grew up since the Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud until today, that involve a woman observing what's called the laws of Midah. And this is what I studied for 2 whole years. The laws of Midah. Midah is the technical term for a woman who's in the state of menstruation. And the laws of Midah require a traditional observant Jewish woman to know when she's menstruating, to count the days properly so that when she's done menstruating, she goes to the mikveh, and after going to the mikveh, she's able to resume marital intimacy. And that's a whole body of laws. We don't have time to go deeply into that and how that works and how it can be meaningful and how it can be problematic for some. Like, it's a big topic, but for our purposes today, it helps explain why we have needed mikvaot in Jewish communities throughout time, even though the temple's been destroyed. And even though a man who has an emission of semen after the temple's destroyed no longer has to go to the mikvah, because even if that person went to the mikvah, you're still going to be in a state of impurity afterwards. It doesn't affect any change. So men walk around, or after you go to a funeral or tend to the burial of a loved one, you might do that little symbolic hand washing, but you're not going to immerse in a mikvah after a funeral. Why not? Because we don't have a temple in Jerusalem anymore. We're all in a state of impurity. So why are women still every month after their menstruation going to a mikvah? Because of this other set of laws around family purity that had to do with the understanding that a woman in menstruation is off limits to her husband during that time, that it's forbidden to have sex during that time, and also that the mikvah marks the transition from when you're not having sex with your husband to when you are having intimacy with your husband. And it's a ritual that I think for many women that observe it is a very beautiful ritual of renewal every month. That's not just about the sexual relationship, but it's also a deeply spiritual ritual about connection to God. Because in my perspective, there's almost no physical Jewish ritual that's as tangible as going to the mikveh. It's very bodily, right? Taking off all your clothes, cleaning yourself in a certain way slowly and carefully with lots of detail before you go into this body of warm water. It's so bodily and tangible and very beautiful. And if you look at the top of page 4,
It's part of meditation.
yeah, I think it's very meditative. If you look on the top of page 4, I love this. And then we'll talk briefly about how you construct a mikveh. The Sefer HaChinuch, and then I'll take the question. The Sefer HaChinuch is a 13th century code of law that's based on Maimonides' list of 613 mitzvot. The Sefer HaChinuch organizes them according to the parshiot of the Torah. And here, the Sefer HaChinuch is asking why for these cases of impurity, like a corpse, leprosy, all the genital flows, why do you have to immerse in water? If, to your point, who made up the system? Did humans make this up because we understood that water helps clean you? Why water? Why not roll around in sand and you're pure? Why not chant this incantation and you're pure? Like, why immerse in a body of water? Why did they come up with that? So the Sefer HaChinuch says the following. As to the reason for water, why it should purify every defiled person, I would think by way of plain meaning. It's obvious, in other words, that it is in order that a person should perceive oneself after the immersion as though one had been created at that very moment. Just as the world was entirely water before there were people in it, as it is written, V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. That's Genesis 1. Thus, a person who immerses in water is like going back to creation. And that person will ponder in his reflection that just as he becomes renewed in his body, right, as you said, water's refreshing. You immerse yourself in a pool of water, it wakes up your body, great. But just as you do that physical refreshing, let him also make his actions equally new for the good, and let him make his deeds worthy, carefully observing the ways of God. In other words, tshuva, repentance. Every time you immerse in water, it's a mini tshuva. It's a mini rebirth. It's a mini conversion. It's a mini way of saying I can dissolve in this water all my sins or all my misdeeds or everything that's happened in my marriage the last month. This is an opportunity to be reborn anew, to think about myself as a new creation. It's why The tradition of going to the mikvah before the high holidays, before Rosh Hashanah, has been a powerful tradition throughout the ages. It's why I hope one day at ATJC that we will build a mikvah, and it will enable us, if we are able to build a mikvah, and I know we're talking about it and hoping to do it, that it'll give us the opportunity to use the mikvah for all the beautiful rituals that mikvah has been used for since the beginning of our tradition. Yes, mikvah was used in the time of the temple to become pure, so that you could go to the temple of Jerusalem. But mikvah was also used as a place to convert to Judaism. And it says in the tradition that when one emerges from the mikvah, it is like you are a born Jew. You're not allowed to refer to a convert as a convert. Once they convert, once they emerge from the mikvah, they are like a born Jew. And you call that person a Jew. You don't call them a convert. So we're going to talk about the uses of the mikvah, but let's talk about how you build a mikvah. By the way, any questions about the laws, the symbolism before I get to the technical? Yeah. Yes? Okay, great. Please.
Yes. The mikvah is there to purify.
Yes.
Now, hypothetically,
Not to make you clean, to purify you.
purify. Hypothetically, if a beggar came off the street, a Jewish beggar, and wanted to go in the mikvah, and he
Perfect.
gets in the mikvah, and then you're the next in line.
Okay, so you are getting ahead of yourself because I'm going to talk about exactly how you prepare for immersion in the mikvah and how you go in a minute. A great question. The question is good because what it's asking is, what if you take a dirty person's body that's covered in mud and you put them in your mikvah and the mikvah water gets all muddy and murky? Is it still a kosher mikvah?
No,
Yes, because you know what is the most kosher mikvah? A lake, a river, a river, an ocean. You can have a really brown lake, kosher mikvah, because it's not about cleanliness. It's not water you can necessarily drink. It could have all kinds of microorganisms swimming in it that would make you have terrible food poisoning.
So it's not very pure. This,
Okay, so let's talk about how a mikvah is built.
Could you explain snow and ice too?
Excellent. Okay, so what is a mikvah? A mikvah is mayim chayim, living water. When we immerse in living water, the idea is that we're connecting to the primordial waters of creation, the waters of Eden. So a natural body of water like an ocean, a river, a lake, those are all mikvaot because they're created, rainwater falls in them, they're living waters. Doesn't mean it's safe to drink that water. Doesn't mean that water's blue. Maybe it's brown, but it's a mikvah. Now, you can't go into the mikvah covered in mud for a different reason. Not because you're going to invalidate the mikvah, but because the idea is you need to prepare yourself for immersing in the mikvah so that there is nothing in between your body and the living waters. So that's why, let me draw what a mikvah looks like. Okay, so let's say that there's lots of ways to go into the mikvah. The best way is an ocean, a lake, a river. But the rabbis living in Eretz Yisrael had a problem. Let's say you were living down in Negev or on Masada or in Jerusalem, where there's not a river, there's not a lake, big enough, an ocean, and how are you going to immerse in living water? Well, what's the best way to collect living water? Rain. But what happens if you're living in a place where it rains like 2 days a year, like Masada, right? If you keep immersing in that same pool of collected rainwater on the top of Masada, by the third or fourth person, like you said, the water is going to be disgusting and it's going to evaporate. So early on, as far back as more than, 2,000 years ago, the rabbis had already created a way to build mikvaot that would make it possible for people to immerse in living water, even if you don't live near an ocean, a lake, or a stream. In Miami, we've been somewhat lucky because we do live near the ocean and the intercoastal. And so this synagogue, whenever it is converting people or taking brides to go to the mikvah before their wedding, we have used Olita Park. But it's not ideal because it's not so private. You have to go into the mikvah naked, so nothing's separating between you and the water. You can't wear a bathing suit in the mikvah. You take off all your makeup, you have to shower, wash your hair, take off your nail polish, you want to enter the mikvah like a newborn baby would come out of the womb, with nothing separating between you and the water. So it's a little complicated. And the Orthodox mikvahot won't let Reform and conservative synagogues convert candidates in their mikvahot. Even though you can't invalidate a mikvah, you can't impurify a mikvah. Even a menstruating woman who goes into a mikvah bleeding can't make a mikvah unkosher. It's not how it works.
She shouldn't do it.
No, she shouldn't do it, fine, but you can't trafe up a mikvah.
I hear you.
It's politics. It's the politics of denominationalism. But because of that, there has been no mikvah in South Florida, indoors, that enables us to create beautiful creative rituals for healing from breast cancer, or for beautiful, we'll talk about all the creative modern rituals that we could do. We can't do. Fine. So this is why it would be amazing if we can build a mikvah here.
Rabbi,
Can't tell you all.
I took a Melton course and we all had to go into a mikvah, so there had
Yeah,
to
you went
be.
you went to see an Orthodox mikvah. Didn't mean that they allowed you to have, if you had a grandchild who was marrying someone who converted to Judaism, that they would allow them to convert there with their rabbi. They
We
don't.
went to the ocean.
Right.
But
They
we
go to the
went to a
ocean.
mikvah.
But we didn't.
Yes, you went to an Orthodox mikvah to see what it looked
We
like.
didn't emerge. We didn't go into the water.
Yes, we did. I did.
How could you?
Okay, well,
But
they
this
will
is
let
what I
you.
remember.
Okay, yes, an Orthodox mikvah may allow a woman to go in before Shabbat, before the high holidays. That's different than allowing a Reformed conversion
Okay,
to
I
take
hear
place in a mikvah. So let me show what it looks like. So I'm drawing not the Negev in the year 200. I'm drawing like America in the year, this year. I'm very bad at drawing. So we're going to just stick with me. Because if you're going to have the same if I'm living in Arizona, in Scottsdale, and it rains once a year, and I finally collect enough rainwater, because if you look on page 4, the water has to be deep enough that you can immerse your entire body like a baby in the womb, where your head, that's what the mikvah attendant is going to observe you, so that all your body goes underneath. So it has to be at least like 4 feet deep at the deepest point. So once I've collected finally that amount of rainwater, I've got to protect it so that it doesn't evaporate and get so disgusting after a month of use that it's like we have to wait till next year when it rains again. So this is called the bor. I'm going to call it the bor. In Jewish law, starting at the time of the Mishnah, we're going to collect rainwater on the roof of the building and connect it with a pipe to, I'm very bad at drawing, but picture this as a pipe that's bringing rainwater into this pit, this bor. This is the real mikvah with a capital M. We are not going to immerse in this mikvah because we got to protect this precious Mayim Hayim rainwater. Instead, we're going to build this beautiful, you saw the mikvah, this beautiful spa-like fancy bathroom with a hot tub. And it's going to have 7 steps leading down. Like the way that it usually works in a mikvah is you have like the preparation room with the shower, and right? And then when they're ready, there's a door. Oh, this is a terrible drawing. But basically, let's say I'm going to the mikvah. If I'm going to an Orthodox woman's mikvah because I'm going for my monthly Taharat Mishpacha, I will do that at nighttime because it's private. Because no one should know when someone else is having marital intimacy or not. No one should know when someone else, right, is in that, it's private. So Orthodox mikvah for women are open at night. They don't have big signs on the doors. You kind of have to know which door is the mikvah door. It's very quiet. You go there, you come in, you usually have an appointment so you're not overlapping with other women. The woman will bring you into the preparation room. You go into the preparation room, and there's usually a shower, bath, beautiful things to take off your makeup and jewelry, take your time, you floss your teeth, you prepare. And when I do this ritual, this is a beautiful time to pamper yourself, to think about the past month, to think about what is your kavanah, what would be your spiritual intention for this immersion as you're going into that womb of life, of connecting to God and creation. How do I want to be reborn this month? There could be a lot of spiritual stuff going on in this room, in your mind. When you're ready, there's usually a buzzer on the door to let the mikvah attendant know that you're ready. And there's usually a lovely, fluffy bathroom. So you're naked. You've taken off everything, all your jewelry, makeup, flossed, brushed your teeth, showered, combed out your hair, no tangles, no anything. Wrap the robe around you. The mikvah lady comes to get you and brings you into the actual mikvah, which is like a beautiful room. You may not see this room. Beautiful room that will have tiles and artwork, and when you get in there, the mikvah lady usually will like take your hands very gently and just check, make sure you don't have any like remaining hairs stuck to you. Maybe look on the back, and then she'll hold up the robe to give you privacy, like in front of her face, and now you're naked, and she's holding it in front of her face, and you start to walk down these 7 steps, which is a beautiful time with each step, and 7 is a number of creation. Some people like to do a blessing with each step for someone in their family or for their life, and then you're standing, and usually the mikvah water comes up to about here. You're standing in a pool, and then you say to the mikvah lady, ready, and then she kind of lowers the robe, and she's watching you, and her job is to make sure that when you immerse, your whole body goes under. And then you immerse 3 times. And the 3 is like a chazaka in Judaism. You do things 3 times because it establishes like permanence, but you immerse and you come up and you say the blessing, Al HaTevilah, praise are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe, who commanded us to immerse. And then you go down a 2nd time and you come up, and many Orthodox women at this point will read a blessing that's on the wall for the rebuilding of the 3rd temple. That's not what I do. There's other blessings one can say after that, and then you immerse a 3rd and final time. But women can request the mikvah lady give them some private time alone in the mikvah. Once they've, the mikvah lady will usually say after the immersion, kosher. They kind of let you know that all your hair went under, that you did a kosher immersion. And then when you're ready to come back out, and some women like to take some moments alone to be in that water again, to think about, how do I want to be renewed this month? Women who might be praying to get pregnant that month, or praying for shalom bayit, for peace in their marriage, or for all kinds of tshuva, or if you're going before Yom Kippur, if you're a man or a woman, or if you're going before marriage. Both Jonathan and I both went to the mikvah before we got married separately from each other, obviously, to pray for the hopes for your marriage. When you're ready, the mikvah attendant will put the robe back up to shield herself, and you'll kind of walk up and she'll envelop you in the robe and lead you back to your changing room and leave, so you have privacy to get dressed and dry your hair and come out. So that's the beautiful ritual. Now, why is this a mikvah? That's not where we've got chlorine in here. We can clean out this water every day and refill it. If someone went in there, no one would go in there muddy, because the mikvah attendant checks you. And if she sees, oh, you missed some dirt on your, okay, so you wipe off the dirt before you go into the mikvah. This is the mikvah with the quotes. Because the rabbis of the Mishnah came up with this very wise system, kissing. The term, I'm sorry, I got my horrible handwriting, hashaka means kissing. They came up with a system where you create a bore of rainwater that you cover with plexiglass or glass to keep it from evaporating if you're living on Masada. It's precious water. And you connect it with a pipe to the mikvah, which is the actual hot tub where people immerse. You can add chlorine to that, you can clean it out and refill it with tap water. And you only open the valve here on both ends when it's in use. So like from 9 o'clock at night until 11 o'clock at night in an Orthodox women's mikvah, you'll open this valve so these waters are intermingling, technically kissing. So this body of water takes on the ritual status of mikvah. And then at the end of the night, you close this back up so that, this water remains its status as the mayim hayim. And this can be filtered, can be chlorinated, you can keep cleaning it. That's how a mikvah works. A few things about the uses of mikvah. So in an Orthodox mikvah, let's say the Chabad here in Aventura has a beautiful mikvah. It's open at night for women that are going once a month after menstruation, and it's open in the day for conversion, or right, or I don't know if they use that one for men before Yom Kippur. I think they have a different one. But one of the things that was really exciting to me when I was, and I'm going to conclude because I know I've gone a little over, one of the things that was exciting for me when I started to teach about mikvah in my first community in Detroit is that there was a real interest in the new liberal spiritual uses of mikvah beyond just women once a month after menstruation or conversion, or before high holidays, which has always been a beautiful time to go. But what about going to the mikvah to mark a life transition, or to heal from a trauma, or to celebrate? So whether it was celebrating, finishing your PhD, or my ordination class, the women in my ordination class, we went to the mikvah together and created a mikvah ritual where we were about to be ordained as rabbis, because that was a major life transition of being born into the rabbinate and transitioning from being not a rabbi to being a rabbi. Or when I was in Detroit, I worked with the Jewish Family Services to create a healing program for breast cancer survivors who had completed their medical healing process, but were still seeking a spiritual healing or some spiritual way to mark that transition from being in treatment to being in remission. And we created a mikveh ceremony for them after learning about this symbolism of the mikveh as rebirth. Lots of ways mikveh has been used, and there's a network of mikvahot now, starting with Anita Diamond, who wrote The Red Tent. She created, with one of my best friends, Elisa Klein, she created the mikveh in Boston called Mayim Chaim, Living Waters, 20 years ago now, and it became a model for the whole country. And now throughout the country, you see liberal communities that will build a mikveh for all the traditional uses that are on this page, but also giving us opportunities to create new spiritual rituals that speak to the needs of Jews today, and it's very exciting. So I hope for all those reasons, both the traditional uses and the new modern uses, that one day we'll have a mikveh here at ATJC, and then we can all explore going in the mikveh, not at the same time, but individually for lots of different reasons. And I hope that this has given you a sense of both the theological background of the symbolism of water for the use of mikveh and the spiritual possibilities going forward.
About Anita Diamond, I know that she's reformed, a lovely woman. I've seen her speak. But for her mikveh, would an Orthodox woman go in? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think so. I think a modern Orthodox woman would go there because it's a kosher mikveh. It was built, yes, I think if mikvah are, you don't just build a mikvah without professionals. There's a whole skill involved in knowing how to create this system in a way that makes it technically kosher for collecting rainwater. There's all these rules in the Talmud and the law codes about the materials you can use, what the pipe has to be made out of, how the bore is connected to your mikvah so that the waters are considered intermingling in the same status. So Mayim Chaim certainly followed all those rules, and I do think Orthodox women immerse there monthly. But where politics enter, it's not about kashrut, it's about politics. It's usually about conversion. And so there, Orthodox people have no trouble finding a place to convert in an Orthodox mikvah. But if you're Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Secular, and you want to convert to Judaism, you either have to find an ocean, a lake, or a liberal mikvah. And there are lots of Reform and Conservative synagogues all over the country that build mikvahs for this reason, but Miami happens, and Boca and Miami happen not to have a liberal mikvah, any Reform or conservative synagogue. So we would be the first, and it would be a big deal, so let's all hope it happens. I think it may. Really thanks to Guido's leadership, by the way. So we'll see.
So what happens
Stay tuned.
if we all want, all of these are women and we all want to go?
So,
No mikvah, how does that work?
so when you actually build a mikvah and open it, then you have to figure out how to run it logistically. So usually you have a whole series of lay volunteers that, and you might need a professional that keeps like the schedule, and people can make appointments. Certainly before big immersion times like the high holidays, or if you're coming for your wedding and you're bringing a group of friends, because in a lot of different customs, like the Sephardic women will come to the mikvah with like a group of 20 friends, and they have sweets and a little party afterwards, and it's a whole thing. So you would need to schedule that with the attendant to make sure the mikvah is available.
Is it one person at a time?
Yeah, it's one person goes into the mikvah with the attendant. No one else is in the room because you're naked. And even when you're converting, let's say your Beit Din of 3 male rabbis is converting a woman, they're not going to go with her naked into the mikvah room. There's a woman who's the mikvah attendant, and the men are outside just hearing the splash and hearing the attendant say kosher, kosher, right? They're not in there with you. Now, when you're in the lake or ocean, the way it has worked, like Jonathan will take converts to Olita Park, and they'll stand on the shore, and the person's friend or husband or sister or mother will swim in with them out into the Olita, that water, until it's deep enough that they can take off their bathing suit and no one can see, because it's, it's dark water. But it's awkward because there's people around. It's not that private, and they're watching from the shore to make sure her head goes fully under and that she says the blessing out loud.
Is there an age? Is there a certain age where you would stop going to a mikvah? Like
Great
we're all
question.
older people.
Yes. Okay, so once you hit menopause and you stop menstruating, you don't need to go every month for taharat hamishpacha, this idea of monthly, like, resuming marital intimacy. But you might still go after menopause before Rosh Hashanah to think about
So
tshuva.
there's no age difference.
You're
You could
not-
be-
You're never forbidden to go to a mikvah. You're never forbidden to go to a mikvah. You can go, even if you're menstruating, you could go to the mikvah. It just doesn't mean that you're allowed to have sex with your husband, right? You can't invalidate a mikvah. You can't make a mikvah treif. There's nothing you can do. So why won't an Orthodox synagogue let a Reform person go into their mikvah? It's not because it will treif up their mikvah. It's just politics, because they don't condone that conversion. Yes.
I have a question. I know that the number 7 is sacred in a lot of, texts. We have Shiva brachas, we have that kind of thing. But is there a reason why there are 7 steps specifically in the mikvah?
I think it's that symbolism of creation, of wholeness, and the
Okay.
same reason you do the 7 circles at the
Right.
wedding.
Seven around.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of creation imagery to going into the mikvah, because the mikvah is like the womb. It's like going into God's womb, or those primordial waters of creation. Remember, even the Sefer HaChinuch in the 13th century talked about this. This isn't just my modern feminist take. This was the imagery. You're going into Mayim Chayim. God was called Makor Mayim Chayim in last week's Haftorah portion. We're immersing in God's creative potential to renew us, to help us be born with, right? Yes.
What happens can you build like a bathtub or a jacuzzi or a swimming pool in your own house?
Great question. I love your question so much. You could build a mikveh in your own house, but not because it's a swimming pool. If I have a swimming pool in my backyard and I go into it and I dunk under it, I haven't immersed in a mikveh. Because a mikveh is this very difficult technical thing that collects natural rainwater into a bore. And a bore means a pit, and it's in B-O-R is the Hebrew word for pit. A pit of water. And that's the technical, in Jewish law about a mikveh, that's the technical body of living waters that becomes that enables this to be a kosher mikveh. But it's usually not the thing you're immersing in. You're usually immersing in the hot tub, the pool, the bathtub that you have built and that you've somehow connected to the bore.
You have to build
So no, you can't use your backyard hot tub.
What happens if you build 7 steps into your hot tub?
No, because your backyard, if you tried to build a pool and just left it there and waited for it to collect rainwater and filled up with enough rainwater that
Oh, it has to be the pure
it
rainwater.
has to be pure
Pure
rainwater.
rainwater.
It has to be living water. Mayim
Do
Hayim.
they have door, things that you open like between the board and the
You
corridor?
don't see this. When you go to a mikveh, you don't see this because it's kind of like behind the wall.
But you
It's-
have to keep it separate, open and close it, or it's all continuous?
There's like a pipe that has a valve, and the valve is opened. The valve is opened before you use the mikveh and then closed. But you, the person using the mikveh, don't see that because it's kind of like the back room mechanics of the mikveh. And the people that build the mikveh figure it out. The people that maintain the mikveh maintain that and make sure. And there's
if they want to empty the last one.
this one you can empty because you close off the valve, and this is just a hot tub. You empty the water, you scrub it, you fill it with tap water, you add chlorine, and then you open the valve, and it's a mikveh. A little bit of a legal loophole, but that's even what the rabbis of the Mishnah had to do. If you're living on Masada, you can't immerse in this because it's going to evaporate, and you're not going to have enough rain to keep this kosher.
All right. Let's say you don't live near an ocean, like you said. You live anywhere without an ocean, but it snows and ice there.
Great.
So do you take the ice,
Yeah.
throw it
So-
on top, and
Yeah.
throw a barbecue to heat the
It's such
heat
a
it
good
up?
question. So I am not an expert. I am not an expert on the mechanics of mikvah. I'm much more interested in like the theological symbolism. So I know more about that than the mechanical halachot because I don't build mikvaot. But it is true that you can get the water
Melted.
for Mayim Hayim that you need through ice and snow when necessary. I don't remember technically how it works, whether you have to get your ice and snow from some that was
Build some snowballs
from
and throw it in
a
the
source of rainwater that is somehow transported and melted into the bore. But yes, the answer is yes. I just don't know how
Research
engineering
it.
is.
Research it.
But yes,
How they
snow,
do it in snow and ice.
snow and ice, but it has to be natural snow and ice
Yeah.
that came from
Well,
rainwater.
where else would it come from? It's natural.
Okay, but the ice in your hotel,
I'm not
ice
talking about
dispenser
that.
is
I'm
not
I'm
ice.
talking about from the ground.
Yes.
Hail and ice.
Yes.
They take a shovel and throw it in there and then heat up the
Yeah,
your
maybe.
pipe.
It's possible.
I think it's possible. We have to explore more. Yes.
Well, I have to go, I'm teaching, I have to go to my
I'm
Zoom at
from
home.
Naples, Florida, and we do have a lovely makeup there. And I don't know how they decided where they placed it. It is the end of a strip mall where Publix is, and here's Publix, you cross the road, and here's this beautiful makeup. And
It's random.
I don't understand how they selected this. Is there any kind of a
That's a
rule?
good question. There's not a rule that you have to build your mikveh in this like secret hidden location. You will sometimes, like in Detroit, they built this beautiful mikveh, freestanding building right off this major road. It had a sign. People knew it was there. The end of the strip mall is an unusual place for a mikveh, but people need to immerse.
It's beautiful, it looks almost like a temple.
Yeah, people need to immerse. It's nice when you can build a mikveh in a synagogue, in kind of like a back part of the synagogue where you can enter it, not from the main entrance, but from like a back entrance. Because that way, I've been to lots of synagogues that work like that. There's a front parking lot where you park when you're coming to services, classes, but there's like a back lot that's small enough, right near some back door that the women know about. And they know that's where you park, and it's secure and has cameras because women are coming 10 o'clock at night. So yeah, it's a whole thing.
Rabbi, I have a question, has nothing to do with the mikvah. You mentioned about we wash 3 times, in the morning, My generation, you don't ask questions, you didn't ask questions. You did because that's what we do to this day, the morning, 3 times.
Yeah.
Is there any?
Why do we wash, when we do Netilat Yadayim, there's different, as you all know from studying with Rabbi, any question you ask, you're gonna get 10 answers. But this is what I learned.
So Nitilat Yadayim, in my family, we do da,
Right, 3 times.
right? You do it twice or 3 times. I learned it's because ritual purity is not about cleanliness. So when you immerse in a mikvah, you should already have taken a shower, cleaned yourself completely, because going into the mikvah is not about becoming clean, it's about becoming pure. It's about this symbolism of being in God's womb. Same with Nitilat Yadayim, which is like a little bit of a symbolic purity. The first rinse is, I'm gonna get any dirt off my hands. That's on my hands. The second and third is the ritual, is purifying. So that's how I learned it. And 3 is a number, just like we do 3 immersions in the mikvah. Some people do 7, some people do 12. There's different systems.
You're a human washing machine.
Yeah, it's 3 is a number of completion. 7 is a number of creation, but 3, if you do something 3 times in Judaism, it's called a chazakah, which means
Strength.
yeah, which means like strength, means like you've established something. You do something 3 times, you establish it.
When I went to the mikvah in Yerushalayim, before I got married, and I had to go to the Rabbi to establish a time. Not all of us tell the truth all the time, but if you've got family coming from abroad, you gotta give them what they want. And when I was there in the Rabbanut, they gave us a paper,
Yes.
like in 23 languages.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And and I still remember this today, and it's been a lot of years, and it said that if you don't go to the mikvah as a woman, may the 7 angels who guard the 7 days of the week curse you.
Oh, that's terrible.
That is awful.
That's terrible. But if you want to get married in Israel through the Rabbanut, you need your mikvah certificate stamp
That's right.
to show the
That you went
Rabbanut
to-
that you went to the mikvah.
Yeah, you can't get married
You can't get
without
married
it.
unless you've gone to the mikvah.
What about here today?
When was it decided?
I don't know about the Orthodox, I mean, obviously not in a Reform or Conservative wedding. I don't think so.
I don't even know if we were allowed to hand it to him.
Okay, folks, I have to go because
No,
I'm
just
teaching,
one
but one last
When
question.
was it decided that men go to the mikvah? I've never heard of it till
Men
today.
have gone to the mikvah since the time of Leviticus.
Many years ago.
The biblical system, men were going even more than women, because the priests that officiated in the temple had to go every day before they could go up to the temple mount. So men were going a whole lot more than women, because more men went to the temple to bring sacrifices than women. Men were going after semen, so anytime you had sex, anytime you had a nocturnal emission, anytime you confronted a dead corpse, anytime you had leprosy, male or female, you went to the mikvah. You never heard of it because it was 2,000 years ago. Then the temple was destroyed. Men, if you go to a Hasidic community, men are going every week before Shabbat, and certainly before the high holidays. So it is definitely something that, yeah. It has been wonderful to study with you.